In today's tutorial, we're going to take a closer look at the review and revise features within Epicor Advanced Requisition Management. Now, these two terms, review and revise, they obviously sound similar, and this has been known to cause some confusion to new users, but these two features are functionally quite different from one another, and we'll look at some specific examples to highlight where each feature should be used. So first up, let's have a look at reviewing a requisition. When we review a requisition, a user is essentially sending the requisition to other users in their organization in order to gather their input. Now, it's important to point out that the users who are being asked to review the requisition may or may not be involved in the actual approval of the requisition, and we'll look at this a little bit more later, but for whatever reason, a user has decided that somebody's input is required on a requisition after that requisition has been submitted for approval. An example of this might be an approver needing some extra context around a requisition before deciding whether to approve it or not. By putting the requisition into review, the approver sends the document to somebody else who provides context for that approver. Armed with that information, the approver can then make the decision to approve or decline the requisition. So let's have a look at a real example of this. And firstly, what I'm going to do is log in as Maurice. Now, if you remember from our other videos, Maurice is a base level user, so it doesn't have too much functionality. But what I've done here is I've created a requisition under Maurice for a laptop. And we can see straight away that now that we've submitted the the requisition for approval, we can see the approval path. And there's actually two different approvers involved in this process because we're actually activating two different approval trees. So this is an example of multi-dimensional approval. Jen needs to approve this requisition line because she is responsible for any requisitions at the location, CHI, that Maurice is at. But we also require Roy in this case because he's our IT manager, so any items that are requested that fall under the category of IT, for example this laptop, will also require his approval. So even though they're the only two in this chain at the beginning, bear in mind that the location tree may have several people involved, as the IT tree or the category tree may also. So we're only seeing the first approvers on this case. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in as Jen, and it's Jen's job, of course, to approve this requisition. But let's say for whatever example, Jen doesn't really know whether to approve this or not because she doesn't have all the information that she requires. So when she logs in, she can see that she has requisitions requiring approval, and we open the requisition in question. So let's say, for example, that Jen wants to get somebody else's input before deciding whether to approve this requisition or not. So what Jen can do is to go up to the review button at the top right-hand corner here and click review. And a little drop-down screen will appear, and we can put in a note here. Let's say, is this okay to approve? And now Jen gets to decide who's getting this review, so who are we sending this to. And you can see that when I click down this drop list, I have several names which appear. Now at this point, these are only names related to this requisition. And what I mean by that is Roy is related to this requisition because he's part of this approval process under the category approval tree. But Maurice is obviously related because he's the person that submitted the requisition. But I've also got Douglas and Denham. Now these are escalated users. So at the location, if Jen was unable to approve the full amount, it would then escalate to Douglas and ultimately to Denham. Now they're not involved in the approval process at this point and may actually not be involved at all. But because they're part of the location approval tree, we have the option to include them as reviewers of this requisition. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it so that Jen is going to request some input from Denham, the CEO, so we can add. And of course, we can add multiple people if we want everybody's input. But let's just send this to Denham, and Jen's basically just going to ask whether it's okay to approve. So we save and close. Now what you notice is happening is that the requisition has now gone into a new status called pending review, and Denham has been sent an email telling him that he has to review this requisition on Jen's behalf. So let's log in as Denham. Okay, and we can see that we have a new line appearing on our sort of actions list here, which is saying that he has a requisition pending review. So when we click on that, we can see the requisition in question. And if you've been very observant, you'll also notice that in the top left-hand corner, we have a little icon now appearing saying that we have some notes against this requisition. And what these notes are is basically the conversation of different reviewers. So you can see that Jen has asked whether this is okay to approve. So what we're now going to do as Denim is we are going to open the review. So we go back up to the top right-hand corner, open that review, put in our own comment, and we'll say that that's fine. Now, does somebody else need to provide input on this? Denim has the option to send this out for further review, and of course the process is then the same. We drop down different people and send it forward. But in this case, let's just say that his review is really the only one that Jen needs, so we're going to save and close. Okay, we can see that the process or the requisition now comes out of that review stage. It's back into the submitted stage again, and we now have 2 notes attributed to this requisition, which is a history essentially of the conversation between Jen and Denim. So I'm going to log back in now as Jen. Okay, now Jen can see the requisition, and she can see that there has been a response from Denim saying that that's fine to go ahead. So now that she has full context, she can go ahead and approve her part of this requisition. So she clicks OK. Now, of course, being an IT-related item, we also now require Roy to give approval to this, and that's a whole nother step. But essentially what Jen has done is she has received the requisition, she has put it into review and sent it to Denim to provide extra input. Denim hasn't actually done anything to the requisition. He's just basically given a note back to Jen to say that it's okay or provide her the information she needs. And now Jen can make an informed decision as to whether to approve or decline her part of this requisition. When we send a document out for review, you saw that we have a drop-down list of people that we can send this to. So let's say Jen was sending this through for review. So we see a list of people here. Now there's only 4 people at the moment, and this is because, as I mentioned earlier, these are all people that are involved in the requisition workflow in one way or another. Roy's involved because he's IT. Maurice is involved because Maurice initiated the requisition. Douglas and Denim are escalation points or people further up the chain for location approval. So that's why we're seeing these 4 people. But what if we wanted to seek input or review this requisition and seek input from people who are not involved in the approval process at all? That's actually still possible, but it comes down to configuration. So what I'll do here is I'll log in now as an ARM administrator, and this is going to give me visibility of all of the configuration menus. And you can see that under the global settings, when I do a search for review, there is an option here for requisition reviewer list. And what this is giving me is, it's basically saying who's going to be visible when I drop down that reviewer list if I'm going to send a requisition through for review to somebody. At the moment, we have this selected so that only people who are related to the requisition can be used or can be chosen as options for review. But you could change this to all reviewers. And so what now happens is when I log in as Jen again, go back to the requisition that we were on, we can see now that when I send this through for review, my list of reviewers is now a lot longer. So anybody that I have selected to be a reviewer under their user role will now appear, and they don't have to be bound to whether they are part of the approval process or not. So potentially, if I wanted to get somebody's input who is completely out of the process altogether, but may have some information that's useful to me, I can still actually send the requisition through to them for review. Remember that in the process of reviewing, the person reviewing doesn't actually get the option to modify the requisition. They can just provide input, attach documents, and that sort of thing. So it just provides context for the approver to make their decision. So hopefully that clears it up. And now that we understand reviewing a requisition, let's look at revising a requisition. So as I mentioned earlier, the revise function is quite different from reviewing. When we review a requisition, we know that we're merely providing information or context around a requisition before it can move forward in the approval process. Revising a requisition is all about editing that requisition after it has been submitted and how that workflow changes once we've made the revision. So let's look at our example again. So I'm going to go back in as Maurice. Now, we know that this approval or this requisition is currently in the process of being approved. We've performed Jen's part of this. We're still waiting on Roy to give approval. But what happens now if Maurice decides partway through the approval process that he wishes to change his requisition. Okay, now take a look at the requisition in the state that it is currently in. We can see that it's with Roy, and if I click the three little workflow lines here, I can see that Jen has completed her section. We've gained full location approval. We're now just waiting on category approval, okay, by Roy. So we're partway through the process. Can we change this requisition now that it's gone through approval? Well, yes, we can, and that's actually what the revise feature is all about. So if Maurice was to go to the workflow button here and click revise, what it now does is it puts the requisition into a revision state or a pending revision, and Maurice is now able to make some revisions. Now, this is conditional and certain things happen once he does. So let's say, for example, I want to get 2 laptops now instead of 1. When I resubmit this, what is actually going to happen is ARM is going to say to Maurice, that's fine, I'll allow this to be resubmitted, but it has to go back into the approval process again. And what that means in this case is that Jen will now have to give reapproval for that requisition. So when I click resubmit, it shouldn't be surprising that the approval process has restarted, and Jen needs to look at this as if it were a fresh requisition and provide approval. Now, of course, Jen could review that requisition the same as she did in the last example. She has all that functionality. And Jen is also able to revise this requisition. But of course, being an approver, having the ability to revise a requisition is bestowed upon them anyway. So if I was to go into Jen, what you find, even without Jen putting this into a revision state, is that most approvers, including Jen, have the option to edit certain things within the requisition anyway. They're just given that priority or given that functionality as a subsequence of being an approver. You have the option to change certain details. But as a requisitioner, as somebody without the authority to approve, when you make a modification or a revision to a requisition, obviously that has ramifications to the approval process. So what would happen in this case is that Jen, even though she's able to make these modifications, because Jen is an approver, it doesn't necessarily re-kickstart the approval process again if she makes changes, because she's an approver and she has that authority. But the revision process or the revision functionality allows a user, particularly those who are not approvers, to make changes to a requisition after it has been submitted for approval. Now, if this requisition was fully approved, revisions will no longer be allowed. So it's only while that approval process is in play. So hopefully that clears up the difference between reviewing and revising a requisition. And of course, all of this information is available in our user guide and through our portal. So be sure to get in contact with us if you need further information about this or any other functionality found within Epicor Advanced Requisition Management.